They say that Methuselah lived to be 900 years old. I don't know. You know what I think? I think that's how long it seemed to his kids. Now, coping with our parents is something we expect to be hard, although maybe not this hard. But why should it be so hard with our siblings? Well, let me give you a few statistics. There are currently 20 million people, 20 million caring for a parent. Of these, 91% say they do not share responsibilities equally with anyone. And 51%, more than half, say they do it alone. Yet we know that 85% of these people have siblings. So, if you are having issues or tensions or conflict with your siblings, you are so not alone. It is an epidemic. By the way, some of you are listening as adult children and siblings. Some of you are professionals. But I'm going to speak to all of you as siblings. If you're professionals, I really want to say I applaud the work you do with families. But many of you have told me that in your own families, you are people. A social worker said to me last week, you can know a lot, but when it's your family, all bets are off. So, this epidemic of sibling tensions is why I've spent years researching and writing my book, They're Your Parents Too. And the correct pronunciation is, They're Your Parents Too. To help people understand why the sibling relationship can be so emotional, even ferocious at this time, and how best to navigate it, not just over caregiving, but all the issues that come up. Power of attorney, end-of-life decisions, dementia, right through to death, mourning, inheritance, so there's a big one, and to the other side, to what I call the sibling generation, when we are the oldest people in our family. Now, this is a hard time. I do not have to tell you people that this is a hard time. But there's also some good news here. There are tremendous opportunities for deep satisfaction, personal growth, and even closeness and connection with siblings, even when it doesn't seem very likely. Now, why is this so challenging? Well, first of all, it's new. A generation or two ago, we didn't go through this long period of caring for aging parents. Our parents are living 30 years longer than people did a couple of generations ago. That is a greater increase in longevity than in the previous 5,000 years. Think about that. But our parents are not only living longer, they're living longer with chronic conditions. Think about your grandma. If she was like my grandma and she lived to be old, well, maybe that was 80. And chances are she was pretty healthy most of that time. And then maybe she got sick, and maybe she went in the hospital, and then grandma died. But now, because of the miracles of medical science, our parents are living longer with chronic conditions, which in the old days they would have died from. And they need a lot of care. But because of all the social revolutions of the 20th century, remember the 60s, the 70s, women as well as men are in the workforce. We live all over the country and the world, and we have very complicated family lives. So just when we need more caregivers, there are fewer available caregivers. So this is new. We have no model, no script, and everybody's trying to figure it out. Not just you, but your sister and your other sister and your brother, and also your parents, who probably did not go through this in the same way with their parents. So have some compassion for yourselves, and also some compassion for your siblings, because they're also struggling and don't know what to do. So the first thing is, this is new. The second thing is that this is not just a practical crisis, this period of a decade. Although the practical stuff, as you know, is daunting, the medical stuff, the caregiving, the emergencies, it's daunting. But this is not just a practical crisis. It's a major emotional passage for the whole family and for each person in it. For the family, it's a new kind of family transition. Never before have adult siblings had to re-engage long-term, intimately, emotionally over the needs of their aging parents. And this after not living in the same household for 40 years. You know those movies that come out every Christmas? Home for the Holidays. It's a comedy, it's a tragedy. Everybody gets under the same roof, and everybody acts the way they did when they were 10. Because that's what we do when we're with our families. We become who we were when we were together. Only now, we're not arguing about who left their slippers in the middle of the floor for someone to trip over, or who didn't do the dishes after dinner. We're deciding really important stuff. And those old ways of working, being 10, doesn't work anymore. Now, when you were growing up, when we're all growing up, our families have a way of working. Everybody has a role, many roles, some of them obvious, some of them not obvious. Family dynamics are very complicated, and I don't want to underestimate that for a minute. But to take a very simplified example, let's say that in your family, your dad made all the important decisions. And in your family, your mom calmed everybody down when they were fighting. And you were the big sister who took charge of the little ones, and you just generally took charge. And you were the little kid who looked to others to take care of you and tell you what to do. And maybe you had another role. Maybe when things got tense, you made everybody laugh. Okay, your family goes along. It's relatively stable. Fast forward 40 years. You get together again. You slip into automatic. Everybody does their roles. Only now, it doesn't work. First of all, some people are missing, and everybody is changed. If your dad made the important decisions, well, maybe he died 5 years ago. And if your mom calmed everybody down when they were fighting, maybe she's too frail now, or she has dementia. And if you were the big sister and you start doing everything, you will feel overwhelmed, exhausted, furious, and maybe a lot of other things. And if you were the little kid, you may be clueless, you may feel guilty, or you may feel like you really know what to do. You're the best person to take charge, but nobody will let you. So the family needs to adapt, and that's just about one of the hardest things for families to do. So that is the crisis for the family. But as if that were not enough, every person in the family, each one of you, each one of us, is going through one of our biggest psychological crises, really, as human beings. To watch our parents age and die, and peeking out right behind our own mortality, up close and personal, in a whole new way. And peeking out right behind our own mortality, up close and personal, in a whole new way. It's huge. And it brings up, it stirs up some really old and deep feelings from childhood. Anything you ever wanted from your parents, to be loved the way you wanted. Who gets loved the way we wanted? To have it finally acknowledged that you're just as smart or just as important as your older brother or that who you are as a person is okay. Well, these needs get stirred up, not just in you, but in your sister, and your other sister, and your brother, and your other brother. And then suddenly this thing that you put behind you years ago, you thought, rising from the deep, sibling rivalry, it's back. Now, you may not even be conscious of it, but it infects all your interactions with each other. And you can tell if the emotions that you are feeling seem out of proportion to the actual things you are talking about. Let me give you an example. Let's say you and your mom are having a discussion. Is mom safe at home, or should she move to assisted living? And that discussion becomes an argument. And that argument becomes furious. And you're thinking, and maybe even saying, you don't care about mom. You don't care if she falls in that old house and dies. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a clue. When the emotions get that out of proportion, that's a clue. You're not just arguing about where mom should live. You're arguing about which one of us understands mom best. Which one of us will be most important to her now? Which one of us will be most loved? And if you can understand that, that can help you step back and look more clearly at the actual things you have to decide. Now, I would like to tell you my story. And I'd like to tell you that I did all this really well. But no, not even close. Everything I just told you, I didn't know any of it. I was completely clueless. I was the sister who lived far away and was uninvolved. I would call my folks on Sundays, and I would visit them every few months, and I kept my visits pretty short because it was not fun to be with my family. It was pretty uncomfortable. My mom was not what you'd call loving. She was harsh. She was judgmental. She was controlling. My dad was really sweet. But he took whatever she dished out and he worshipped her, which was painful for me to see. And my sister, my younger sister, now she will have a different point of view. And her point of view will be just as valid as mine. But I believe that from the day she was born, she was pissed off at me. Convinced that she got the short end of the stick. And you know, maybe she did. But I got to tell you, in my family, neither end of the stick was a prize. My sister said she didn't feel loved. Well, I didn't exactly feel loved. I remember in my 40s, I got up the courage to ask my mom, finally, my heart beating, Mom, did you ever love me? And she looked at me and she said, of course I loved you. If your hair didn't look nice, didn't I always tell you? So that's what things were like in my family when my mom started failing. She was in a nursing home the last year of her life, and it was my sister doing a fabulous job helping my dad through it. I was living in New York. I had my own life. I was widowed. I had kids. I was working. The important thing is no one asked me to do anything. And I did not volunteer. The only thing that changed was the emotional temperature. It used to be my mom who would always say to me, you never come, which, by the way, was how she said hello. Hi, Mom. You never come. I'm not kidding. Now it was my sister, channeling my mother, same words, same tone of voice. You never come. And what did I do? I did what I had learned to do my whole life. I deflected. It wasn't until my mom's funeral I was standing a little to the side, and I saw my dad and my sister, arms around each other, clinging, holding each other up, sobbing. I got my first hint of this horrible ordeal they had been through without any support from me. And I felt deeply ashamed. From that moment on, I was instantly more present for my dad. But I kept asking myself, how did I get this so wrong? Because, honest, I'm not a terrible person. I'm not. And while I kept asking myself this question, I saw in my work as a journalist on the Boomer Beat at Time magazine so many other siblings in trouble in the same way, in different ways. And I said, what is going on here? Because that's what journalists do. We look at what's going on and we try to figure out the answer. And so I spent years researching this. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I learned and how I learned it. First, I interviewed 50 siblings, sometimes as many as 5 in the same family. You want to hear 5 different stories? I heard them. I found out what they did right, what got them into trouble, what they yearned for, and what they got. Second, I found the latest academic research that pertained to this, from gerontology, sociology, psychology, psychoanalysis. And I talked to the researchers, and I looked at things like research on caregiving, on favoritism in childhood, favoritism in old age, dementia, end of life, everything that pertains to this part of life. Third, I talked to people like you, the best practitioners in the field, social workers, geriatric care managers, hospice counselors, physicians. And I mined their wisdom and expertise. And I synthesized all of this, the stories of families like yours, the research, the wisdom, and I put it in my book. They're your parents too. And in the hope that it would help other people. Now, as siblings, there are so many challenges for us, but one of the biggest is how to communicate with each other when our old roles from our families and our old communication styles kick in. I'd like to give you an example. I tell this story in chapter 5 of my book, which is called We Weren't Your Norman Rockwell Family. I interviewed a lot of people, and nobody said they lived in that family. This is the story of Stan and Leslie, brother and sister. They were really nice people. I liked them. First of all, they liked each other, and that's really nice to see. Also, I had a teeny little role in helping them with their problem, and that felt good. So, Stan and Leslie, this is what they learned about communicating from their immigrant parents. We stand on our own 2 feet. And we don't make a big deal of our problems. So, for example, if one of the parents had surgery, they wouldn't tell their adult kids until afterwards. Mom, why didn't you tell me you were in the hospital? We didn't want to make a big deal. So that's what they learned. Okay, now Mom is gone. Dad has Parkinson's. He's in a nursing home down the street from Stan. Stan is the caregiver. He is happy to do this role. His sister, Leslie, lives several states away. She has lots of family problems. And he gets, as you can imagine, a man doing the caregiving. He's a good son. He gets all this satisfaction and this praise. But as the years go by and his dad declines, he begins to feel hurt that his sister, Leslie, is so rarely in touch. And he thinks, if she cared about me, if she cared about Dad, she would be calling, she would be here, she would be here for us. Well, So she must not care. And his hurt and his anger grew. Then finally, Leslie came to his town to see their dad, and he went to Stan's home, and he said, "Come into my study." And he led her in and to his desk, and he yanked open the file drawer, overflowing with papers and documents for his dad. And he said, look at what we deal with on a monthly basis. Well, Leslie went home. About a month later, I called her, and she said, "It hit me like a ton of bricks what sacrifices my brother was making. I felt so guilty." And I asked her, "Well, what did you do?" And she said, I didn't do anything. I didn't know what I could do from so far away." Then suddenly she started thinking, wait a minute, I know, I could fly out to Stan's and give him and his wife a vacation. That's what I could do. And as she came up with ideas, I could hear her voice change. As the burden of guilt lifted, a note of joy crept in. The very next day, I got a call from her brother Stan. He said, "Guess what? My sister called me, and she thanked me for everything I was doing for our dad, and she asked what she could do." He said, "You know what? That's really all I wanted." Well, if only all sibling issues were so easy to fix. They're not. But there are some common threads in their story that can be useful to other siblings. For example, why didn't Leslie know to give Stan the emotional support that so many siblings have told me and probably told you is so important? The feeling you're in it together, having someone to vent to, knowing you're not alone. And why didn't Stan know that telling his sister what she could do would be a gift? Well, for all of the things we've been talking about, it's new, and there's no model. Nobody has a script for how to do this. 2, our old family roles and communication styles kick in, and we go on automatic, and we don't re-examine them. But these 2 also fell into some very common communication traps, which if you know about them, you stand a much better chance of avoiding. Because every interaction between siblings involves 2 people at least. And if even one of you changes your attitude or what you do, even a tiny bit, that can change the whole interaction. So these are the traps. Trap 1, and this is for the whole family, which is not getting together early and discussing who will do what, who will need what, when, and not including everybody. You may think your brother isn't interested or your sister doesn't care, but I guarantee you 3 years from now, there's some issue, she's going to be there and she's going to be pissed that she wasn't included. So talk early and often. Trap 2. This is for siblings of caregivers, and it's very common. A belief that taking care of a parent is simply a series of concrete tasks. And if my sister's doing it, well, it's done. Not realizing, as I didn't, that this is a major family passage that affects everyone. Trap 3. And this is for caregivers, and it's a hard one. Not being sure what it is you really want from your siblings. Now, you may know how you feel. You may know you're hurt, you're pissed off, you're angry, you're resentful, but you may not actually know what it is you want from them. Did Stan know that he wanted primarily appreciation and thanks and emotional support from his sister? I don't think so. Not until he got it. So if you're a caregiver, ask yourself, do you want primarily emotional support, to be appreciated and thanked, to have someone to vent to be able to say, What Dad did today, he drove me crazy. You know what he can be like. Or do you actually want help with the tasks that you have to do, either locally or long distance? Because a lot of things with a little imagination can be done by phone, by internet, long distance. Or do you feel like you've got it under control, you don't want anyone else interfering, but boy, could you use some money for services or respite? Is that what you want? Or, and this is the hardest one of all, and it takes some real soul searching, do you want to hang on to some aspect of the way things are, to keep for yourself the deep satisfactions you get from caring for your parent, the feeling that you're so important, maybe even, if you're honest with yourself, the most important one. Because if you figure this out, that can help you know what it is you need and what to ask for. Trap 4. This is a common belief in families. It's a common belief, and in some families it's a sacred motto passed down from generation to generation as if it came from the Bible. I shouldn't have to ask. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you believe it. I certainly heard it in my family. Well, here's what I can tell you from talking to many, many families. Doesn't work so well, and it brings many families to grief. So I'd like you to re-examine this belief right now and what it implies. First, that your sister or brother should read your mind and know what you need, even though they're struggling with their own lives and problems. Even though you yourself may not be 100% sure what it is you need, and you may be sending out mixed messages. The second thing I shouldn't have to ask implies it's an even more destructive thing, an interpretation. If my sister were a good daughter, if my brother were a decent person, a good son, a fill in the blank, then he or she would automatically know what to do and would just step up and do it. Stan, for example, believed that if his sister Leslie cared about him and his father, well, she would know what to do, and as the night follows the day, she would just step up and give him what he needed. It turned out not to be true that she didn't care. She actually said to me, I'd do anything for my brother if he asked me. So, trap 5. Trap 5 is where you end up if you fall into traps 1, 2, 3, and 4. I call it getting stuck in the anger, guilt, gridlock. Here's how it works. You think, if I make my brother feel guilty, he'll do what I think is right. This has a certain logic to it. It seems to make sense. There's just one problem with it. It doesn't usually work. Guilt feels uncomfortable, and it makes people want to defend themselves. Some sociologists did a study of caregivers and their siblings, and they discovered that when the caregivers made their siblings feel guilty, the siblings defended themselves in so many imaginative ways. First, they rationalized about why their help wasn't needed. They minimized what the caregiver was doing. Hey, she's not doing so much. Why should I feel bad? Or they criticized what the caregiver was doing. And she's not even doing it right. Or they withdrew, as I did. Or they got paralyzed, as Leslie did. Or they attacked. And they got angry and attacked. So here's how the anger, guilt, gridlock works. You, consciously or not, and it's often not conscious. So, we can't hear how we sound when we're talking to other people. So you, consciously or not, do or say something to make your siblings feel guilty. They defend themselves in one of these very unpleasant ways, and they don't do what you're asking. You get more hurt, more angry, dump more guilt and anger on them. They defend themselves more, and round you go, and there you are, stuck in the anger, guilt, gridlock. So, these are the communication traps. 1, not preparing early and discussing ahead of time who will do what, and including everyone. 2, siblings thinking the job is taken care of because a sister or brother is doing it. 3, caregivers not being really sure what they want. 4, believing you shouldn't have to ask. And 5, getting stuck in the anger, guilt, gridlock. So, you're there. You're stuck. Is it possible to get out? Now again, I want to say, family dynamics are very complicated. They have very long histories. And there are times where you can't get out. But it is possible if one person, you, changes your attitude or what you do even a little bit, you may find a way out. Now, I'd like to tell you a story of some siblings who did find a way out. Later than was best, but finally. I call this the story of the 3 sisters. Now, that's the name of a play by Chekhov, which this is not. But there was plenty of drama in this story. It just was seething under the surface. 3 sisters. Catherine, the middle sister. Sharon, the older sister. Evie, the younger sister. Catherine was the caregiver. She was the good daughter. She and her mom were soulmates. Everything her mom believed, she believed. She was the perfect daughter, good church-going family. Catherine married the minister's son. How good is that? Okay, older sister, Sharon. She fought her mother tooth and nail from the day she was born until she was in her 60s. She was still fighting mom, rebelling against everything. Now, younger sister Evie was much younger, and she had figured out she could do what she wanted as long as she was quiet about it. So those were the 3 sisters. When mom was widowed, Catherine said to the family, "I think mom should move in with me." Great idea. Everyone agreed. Her husband was supportive, her kids were in school, she had an extra room, and she and mom had a great relationship. And it worked. Worked for years. Then mom had a stroke, and she didn't get better. She got worse and worse and worse. And as the years went by, Catherine began to feel sad and lonely. Her mom could hardly communicate, and she was feeling devastated. And she wanted her sisters, whom she was fond of. So here's what she did. She sent them magazine articles about how hard it is to care for an aging parent. She would call them from time to time and say, "Mom needs more attention from you," even though they knew their mother didn't even know when they were there. And then a couple of times a year, she would call and say, "We have to be out of town for a conference, June 14th to 24th, can you come and stay with mom?" And one of them always said yes. And yet when I first spoke with Catherine, it was exactly a year after her mom's death. And those sisters had not spoken one word to each other in a whole year. Catherine was so bitter. She said to me, "My sisters were remarkably not there for me." So she and I talked, and I asked her a lot of questions, what she had done, what she had not done, and she told me the things that I've just told you. And after we talked, about a week later, she called me, and she said, "You know, I was thinking about what we talked about, and I realized I had a role in what I did and didn't get from my sisters." Now, she didn't stop being angry, and she didn't stop being hurt, but she had changed her attitude a tiny bit, and there was an opening out of the anger, guilt, gridlock. So here's what she did. She called her sisters. She actually didn't call them. She called their answering machines late at night. And she left them the following message. I really miss you. I really want to get together and talk about what happened. And her sisters called back crying, and they made a date. They lived far away, so they arranged to meet at a city near them. They rented a hotel room. They got together. They had a cup of coffee. And Catherine explained how abandoned she had felt, how lonely during that time they weren't present. And her older sister, Sharon, said, you know, I don't feel bad about what I did and didn't do for Mom. I felt what I did was appropriate for the relationship we had. But I was so caught up in my battle with Mom that I didn't see you and what you needed, and I am so sorry. Her older sister, her younger sister, Evie, piped up, defending herself and saying, I sent you cards. You never responded. Catherine said, those cards you sent me, they were so cheery, and they were so not where my head was at that I just couldn't deal with them. But I should have told you where my head was at, and I didn't. So they talked about a lot of stuff, not everything could be discussed, but they decided that they would meet again once a year and have this weekend together, just the three of them. Then they went shopping. So let's say that you're the caregiver like Catherine, and first, you've figured out what it is you really want. And second, you are willing to ask for it. What are the most effective ways to ask? Now, I want to acknowledge, first of all, that it's hard to ask for what we need. It's a cultural thing. It's a woman's thing. It's not just a woman's thing. It is hard. But if ever there were a time to ask, this is the time. And this is what worked in the families that I spoke with. Don't hint, ask directly. Sending magazine articles or venting about how tough your life is, that tells people that you are unhappy. It makes them feel guilty, but it doesn't tell them what you want from them. So be specific, ask directly, and be aware that people have complicated lives. You can't dictate, do this, do that, this time. But the one thing Catherine actually got from her sisters is the one thing she asked for very specifically. She asked in plenty of time. She said, I need to be away these dates. Can one of you do it? And she always got a good response. The other thing, and this is a hard one, is to be realistic about what you ask from your siblings. And when I say realistic, I don't just mean in terms of what kind of job your brother has or how far away your sister lives. I mean realistic in terms of the relationships in the family. For example, if your sister can't be in the same room with your dad for 10 minutes without screaming at him, asking her to spend FaceTime with your dad is probably not going to work. But maybe she could do something else, buy the groceries, do the paperwork, something else. I want to give you an example of a super realistic woman. She said, my mom is a piece of work, and my brother cannot stand her. So when my mom needed care, I called my brother, and I said, listen, Mom needs some care now, and she's going to need more as time goes on. I'll take care of this, but I cannot pay for it. Will you send me a check every month? He said yes. About 6 months later, he called her up. He said, so how's it going? Is there anything I can do? And they became very, very close, because what she did not do is tell him he was a bad son for feeling the way he did. He was a bad brother for not helping her more. She didn't load him with guilt. And she recognized the reality of what the relationships were in their family. Now, recognizing the reality in your family, this can be one of the hardest things there is, because at this time, of life, there's a lot of yearning for the family you wish you had. And it can be really, really hard to accept reality when maybe the reality is no matter how hard you work at it, you will never make your mother happy. Maybe she wasn't happy to begin with, or maybe her losses and her aging have created such sadness that this just isn't possible. And it may be that no matter how much you yearn to be close to your brother, that will never happen. But accepting that reality can bring some relief and peace and help you get what is possible, rather than wishing and being angry that you can't get what's not possible. And finally, if you're in deep conflict with your siblings and you have to make important decisions, I say, call in the ref. There are so many elder professionals now who are there to help you. Social workers, geriatric care managers, nurses who are trained in family dynamics. There are elder mediators and elder law attorneys on the appropriate times, and family therapists. And nobody should feel embarrassed to call in these people, because many social workers have told me that they themselves called in an outsider to help them and their siblings deal with their issues. As one social worker said to me recently, I help a lot of families with just this stuff, but when it was my family, my own feelings made me feel like a deer in the headlights. So nobody should feel embarrassed to call in an outsider, because none of us can see our feelings, can see our families clearly. Now, I know that my sister and I could have used some help. And before I take your questions, I thought maybe you might be curious to know what happened with me and my sister. Now, as I said, I was instantly much more present for my dad, which was, of course, much easier since he was a sweetheart. And we were very lucky with him. His last few years were good. He had a girlfriend. He went on cruises. And he died quietly at home. He had his share of medical problems. It wasn't easy. My sister was still there doing the do. But it was good. I got a call from my sister's best friend one morning. She said, "Hon, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your dad passed away last night." And while I was absorbing the shock, I could hear my sister in the background crying. And she said, "Is she coming? Is she coming?" And I said, "Of course I'm coming." When I got there, my sister threw her arms around me and said, "We're the only ones left." Well, I'd like to tell you that from that moment on, our relationship was fixed. But it was not so easy. Still, I regretted my part in all of this, and so I made real efforts to work on that relationship. I would go down and meet, go out to dinner with her and her husband. I would invite her up when my kids were in town. I made a lot of efforts. And then about a year after my dad's death, you know how when you need to say something important and difficult, you kind of write it and rewrite it in your head. You're in the shower, you're in bed, you just keep figuring it out. Well, I was with my sister, and that apology that I'd been drafting and redrafting in my head just poured out. And I said, "I am so sorry I wasn't there for you when Mom was dying. And I can't change that. But I promise you, if you ever need me again, I will really try to be there for you." And she accepted my apology. But just as important, I learned to forgive myself, because what happened in my family, what happens in everyone's family, is way bigger than one person's mistakes. So now my sister and I have a relationship. It's not perfect, never was, never will be. But it's valuable to me, and I think to her. We share a whole history. She's the only person on earth, for example, to whom I can say, do you remember what Uncle Maury did at Cousin Temmie's wedding? And she'll go. My Uncle Maury was a really sweet man, but more than a little eccentric and very, very thrifty. And at my cousin's elegant dinner party, wedding, the flowers, the tables, the music, he went from table to table, reaching into the dinner rolls and stuffing them in his pockets for later. And my sister is the only one who remembers that. And that's a wonderful thing. Thank you.